So earlier this year, I came up with this idea, what if I do a series on kind of like, I was thinking through big things I've learned about God in my life and kind of rooted in my mistakes. And if I could go back in time and talk to my younger self, what would I ask myself to change and redo? So I thought, I wonder if this would be an okay series. And so I thought I would put it together and give it a try. When I was thinking about what topics would I go back and talk to my younger self about to try and help, stubborn young Brian listen and change. I mean, who knows if I would have. But one of the topics immediately came to mind is I wish I would have done some things differently when it came to how I handled my faith during really hard times in life. During times when I was suffering and things I've said to God and the way I've treated Him, I have a lot of regret over that. And part of what became clear to me over the years is that what happens in America, and this is really like an American, it's a first world problem. It's what we do is in America, especially what I did, is I took the American dream and I put it on top of Christianity. So I became a follower of Jesus as a freshman in high school. And so then all I did is added following Jesus to the American dream, right? Because the American dream is I'm going to have money and I'm going to have a nice house. I'm going to have a nice, I'm going to be very successful at everything I do, and Jesus. And so this is what it's all about, is that I just put that on top of here. And my expectations were that you listen to the marketing messages of the world and they say, listen, life is about being happy, right? Number one thing, you need to be happy. So whatever it takes to be happy, you should do that. And life is about you, and you deserve a break today, and it's really about you. And I believed it. I believed it all. And I put that right on top of my following Jesus. And so my expectation was, hey, now I'm following Jesus, I'm going to have Jesus and all of this too. And so that means, good things are going to happen for me, and I'm going to have good life. And that means, bad things, not much. I mean, maybe an ingrown toenail. I can handle that, right? A bad hair day once in a while, although that's becoming less of an issue. So that certainly wasn't on the list of things that were okay, God. And then, chapped lips once in a while, maybe that, but I mean, it's like nothing serious because I'm following Jesus now. So now it's just going to be smooth sailing the rest of my life. And then what happens? Not that. Not that. And it's interesting because Jesus warned us specifically about it. When He was talking to His disciples, He said, I want you all to know this. He said, in this world, you will have trouble. Was Jesus accurate when He said that? In this world, you will have trouble. Yeah, He was pretty accurate about that. And think about Jesus. Did Jesus have trouble? Did Jesus face any trouble while He was here on earth? Did Jesus have people who betrayed Him? Yeah, He had that. Did Jesus suffer unfairly? Yeah, He had that. Did Jesus know what it was like to have people gossip about Him and make up stories about Him? Yeah, He had that too. Did Jesus know what it was like to have violence? To experience personal violence? Yeah. So He didn't just say, listen, this is what's in this world. He modeled how we should go through it, but none of that clicked in my young mind. I just thought, I'm following Jesus now, things are going to be smooth sailing, and this is going to be great, and it won't have any kind of problems. And then I started suffering, and I didn't understand what was happening to me. Because this isn't the American dream. And that's the problem. I'd ignored what Jesus said and just believed what the culture had said. And so the result of that on my faith was pretty significant at a couple of points in my life. When I was going through some really, really hard things, I remember one time I was going through a church split, and it was brutal. People that I loved, that I cared about, who had been a part of their lives for a long time, went with the other person in the middle of the church split, and they said awful things, many of them on the way out the door, and it hurt me so bad. And I was struggling so much with anger and bitterness about this whole situation. I felt it was completely unfair. And I was talking to God one day about it, and I felt like God just didn't care. And I thought, oh, okay, if you don't care, then I don't care either. I don't care about you. And I just kind of withdrew from God. Because I didn't know how to process pain and suffering as a follower of Jesus. I just assumed that it meant something was wrong with Him. I didn't understand this. And in those times, I made a lot of bad decisions. Turning away from God, getting mad at God, being bitter toward God. And then here's what always happened. God continued to be faithful to all his promises, even when I was unfaithful to him. And I would watch as God did what only God can do in healing and restoring and changing things. And then I would eventually get to the point where I would see the kindness of God revealed, and I would feel tremendous regret that I didn't trust him in those difficult times. And I don't want that for you. I want for me, for the rest of my life, and for all of you, that no matter what comes our way, our faith really remains strong. And so that's what this message today is about. We're in a series called Redo, and these are some things I'd redo. And I want to talk to you about what I've learned about trusting God during the hard times. So please open your program. Take out the notes you'll find inside. If you haven't grabbed your notes yet, would you grab them and a pen? There are going to be some things you're going to want to write down as we talk about this today. And of course, welcome to all of you who are watching online. We're so glad that you're there. So if you want to grab our notes from our website, you can at pendlechurchlife.com. So let's jump right into this. We're only going to get through a couple of these today. First thing is you have to put faith thoughts in your mind. They're not going to be there. The next time you go through something really difficult or painful, they won't be there. You've got to make them be there. Put faith thoughts in your mind. So this is really relevant for one of my kids right now. So this is my daughter Rachel and her husband Jake and my grandson Lincoln. So this was a few years ago when they lived in Appleton. So it's one of my favorite pictures of them, and I just love this picture. And so shortly before Lincoln was born, back when Rachel was pregnant, they moved to Appleton and they wanted to buy a house, right? That's what you do. You buy a house. So they bought a nice house in Appleton. And so they're excited, fixing the house up, remodeling, getting ready for the birth of Lincoln. And all of a sudden one day, a huge storm goes through Appleton. And they have a gigantic tree in their backyard, and it falls on the house. And it does damage to the roof and the shingles, and it's a huge mess. As you can see, this is a gigantic tree. And so they've got all this cleanup and all this problems, and it was really hard. So, and especially, you've got the pregnancy hormones, right? And so all of a sudden, everything's amplified times 1 billion. And so it was a really tough time for her. And so they get through this and they work it out. And so, good news. Then eventually they leave Appleton and they both get jobs in Tyler, Texas. And now my daughter, grandson, and husband, they live down in Tyler, Texas. And she's pregnant with child number 2. So another grandchild for me, which is awesome. And this last week, storms came through Tyler, Texas. And this is what their house looks like. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? I've never had a tree on my house one time my entire life. She's had 2, and both when she was pregnant. So I can laugh a little bit now. The tree is off. They got it off yesterday, but she wasn't laughing. When Rachel called, she was really, really struggling. It's like, feels overwhelming, and feels unfair, and it feels like, what is going on? And this time, it turns out in Texas, the insurance works a little differently, and so it looks like it's going to cost them a significant amount of money to do this. And so they're really struggling with their faith. And I get it. I don't have a tree on my roof, but I certainly know what it's like to have things that are hard and difficult happen in my life. And what I've always learned is that in the middle of those circumstances, and I've told you this many times, remember, it's not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you that determines whether your faith is going to grow or die. Because plenty of people go through worse things, and their faith stays strong. As a matter of fact, if you ever want to read more, I put it on the back of your notes. There's this huge passage. It's too long to read to you today, but I gave you an example of a person whose faith was strong in the middle of horrific things. So, but here's some things I've learned. And what I've really, really learned is this. If you put the right faith thoughts in your mind in the middle of suffering, your faith grows, it doesn't die. Here are the 3 key faith thoughts that I've learned in my life. The first thing that I say to God when I'm in the middle of real hard, a difficult thing is, I know you love me. I know you love me. Because I've already made this mistake, and I don't want to ever make it again. where I thought he didn't love me, and the suffering was proof that he didn't love me. Listen, I don't know why. I don't know why, but I know it has nothing to do with love. I may not be able to explain why something is happening in my life, but I know it has nothing to do with love, and the reason I don't know that is because of this. This forever seals the deal when it comes to love. Because, like Jesus said, greater love is no one than this, that they would lay down their lives for a friend. Right? That is the greatest love. If I love you a little, I might help pay a bill. But if I love you a lot, I would literally give my life for you. It's the greatest demonstration of love. You ever hear stories in World War II, or in war in general? But I remember from World War II where soldiers would be in a foxhole and they'd be fighting the Germans, and all of a sudden a German would lob a grenade into the foxhole, and there was no time to react, and you know what one of them would do, right? Many times he'd fall on the grenade and take all of the impact to save the brothers in the foxhole that he loved. Greater love has no one than this, that they would lay down their life for a friend. So I may not be able to explain what's happening or why it's happening, but I know it has nothing to do with love. Nothing. That was sealed forever when Jesus Christ gave his life for you and for me. It's the surest proof of how much he loves us. So we can't explain what's happening, but we know it has nothing to do with the love. And Paul comes along and says this: I'm convinced that neither death nor life or angels or demons, neither the present nor the future nor any powers, neither height nor depth nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. So he's saying, listen, I don't know what this is about, but I know it's not about love, because that is forever sealed at the cross. And nothing can keep you from his love. He loves you completely as you are, and he'll never love you more than he loves you right now, and he'll never love you less than he loves you right now. It is 100% unconditional love that we receive through Jesus Christ, or through Jesus Christ. So I know, I can't explain why, I don't understand, but I know it has nothing to do with love, and so I intentionally tell myself this: God, I know that you love me. And sometimes it's not how you feel, and that's okay. Faith can be despite how we feel. So some of you, this would be a demonstration of faith, saying, God, I know you love me. I don't understand this, but I know you love me. And then the second thing I say to myself is, I say to God, I know you'll bring good from this. It's one of my favorite ones. I know you will bring good from this. One of my favorite verses also is from Romans 8, and it's a verse I've quoted many times. We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. Please don't misread that verse. It doesn't say all things are good, does it? It doesn't say that. It says this: God works for the good of you. God is working. And in what things? All things. All things. How many of you, if the service ended today and you walked outside and your car was on fire, would go, well, that's a good thing, right? Well, that's a good thing. Look at that good thing, right? We wouldn't say that. We would say, that's a bad thing. That's not a good thing, right? It doesn't say that all things are good. But he says that he is so powerful and so clever and so smart that he can work for the good and bring good out of anything you and I go through. Even our own mistakes. So, let me go back to that car fire thing. True story, there was a person whose car caught on fire and burned up everything, and when they put the flames out, he was sorting through his car, and he found his Stanley tumbler. And he opened it up, and it still had ice. Now that's a good tumbler. So some of you know what I'm talking about, some of these things. They just hold that ice forever. So he posted a video about it, and it went viral, and the head of the president of Stanley contacted him and said, listen, we want to send you a whole bunch of swag, and on top of that, we want to buy you a brand new car. So can God bring good even out of a car fire? Some of you're like, I'm lighting my car on fire. Don't do that. Don't do that, right? Even with my daughter Rachel, when I was talking to her this last week about the first tree that fell on our house, the first tree, we were talking about it. Of course, I walked through that whole journey with them as they process the emotions of it and all the challenges of it. Because working with insurance companies, everybody's like, oh my goodness, that's so much fun. Don't we all wish that we could deal with insurance companies all the time, right? So it wasn't fun and it was difficult and they had some out of pocket. But by the time that they were done, the insurance company helped with so many things that they basically got to remodel a big chunk of their house. They got a new roof, new fascia, new siding, they put siding on, painted it. They painted it, that's what they did. They ended up doing all of this construction, and then right after that, they got new jobs in Tyler, Texas, and they had to sell their house, and there was so much equity in the house that they got all this money because a tree fell on their house. And they just turned that around and put it in their new house, and a tree fell again. And I said, good, this means God wants you to move back, right? Right? Grandpa. Bring back to Grandpa, right? That's what this means. So she doesn't agree with my interpretation, but that's what he does. Was it good that a tree fell on their house? No. Does God work for the good in all things? Yes. This is our God. This is his promise. And my favorite part of this whole thing is, and I say this to him, I know you're already there. Since I know that you promised to bring good, I'm so grateful for this one that you're already at work. I know you're already at work. And I know it because it's what Jesus said specifically. Look at the verse on your notes. Jesus replied, my Father's always working, and so am I. Always. Isn't that a great word? Always. You know what this means? That God is already at work in the situations in your life that are painful for you and confusing for you and hurtful for you to bring good. That's what he says. That's why I constantly tell you, you got to read your Bible. You got to read your Bible. I know I sound like a broken record. It's been an essential part of faith building in my life since I became a Christian. And so we give away Bibles for free. If you're watching online and you want us to send you a Bible, we will happily send you a Bible. Let us know. But I was reading just last fall in the book of Psalms. And it tells this amazing story about how the nation of Israel was going out of Egypt, and they were going to the land that God had promised to bring them. And as they were going along on this path, they had to travel between all of these nations that were already existing, and they were terrified that these nations were going to overwhelm them. There'd be nothing they could do, and yet they were protected all the way through. And here's what it says in the book of Psalms about it. When the Israelites, were but few in number, few indeed, and strangers in it, in a foreign land, they wandered from nation to nation, from one kingdom to another. Now that's a dangerous thing to do back in those days, because they would assume you're invading. And they would come out with their armies and they would fight you off. So it's a scary spot to be in. And look what it says. He, God, allowed no one to oppress them. For their sake, he rebuked kings. He said to them, do not touch my anointed one. Do my prophets no harm. So you hear what he says happened? As the nation of Israel is traveling to the promised land and they're going through these other kingdoms, God specifically went to the kings in these other kingdoms and said, hands off. You touch these people, you deal with me. Now, how did he do it? We don't know. It doesn't say more than that. Did he send an angel? Did he give them a dream? Did he speak? How did he speak? We don't know. It just says that he told them, don't you touch my people. Now, did the nation of Israel know that God was doing that? No. And so whenever they encountered something scary, they were like, oh, God isn't doing anything. God isn't doing anything. Was God doing nothing? Oh no, he was already at work. He was already working in their lives to protect them, and they just didn't see it. And that's a key thing. Somebody told me, I read this last year, that God is at work in our lives in 100 different ways, and maybe we're aware of 1 or 2 or 3. What if that's true for you right now? That God is working in the situations that cause you pain and confusion and heartache. behind the scenes to do things for you and for the best that you can't even see yet. So I know myself, listen, I don't know you, but I know me. I know that the next time something really painful happens, these thoughts won't be in my mind automatically. I have to put them there. So if you, the way I do it in a lot of different ways. I tend to use lately, my latest thing is lots of sticky notes. Lots of sticky notes. Matter of fact, if you go over to my laptop after the service is over, there's a yellow sticky note from the last time I went through something really difficult, and here's what I wrote out. God, thank you for this opportunity to rely on you. I don't have this, so my shepherd will have to guide and provide. Thank you that you're already working. And anytime I was scared, anxious, worried, I would just look down at my laptop and pray the prayer. So that I would intentionally put the thought back in my mind. Because unless you're different than me, it won't be there automatically. You have to make it go there. So think about that. Put fake thoughts in your mind if you want to be able to trust God when things are really hard. But here's the bigger one. Okay, this one to me was one of the biggest lessons in my whole life. Never judge in the middle. One of the most important spiritual lessons I've ever learned. I heard a radio Bible preacher years ago tell this story, and I could never find it until I found it recently. It's an ancient Chinese parable. And I absolutely love this. And I'll tell you, you listen to this story and tell me who you relate to, because I relate to the neighbor. Okay? So there was a farmer. It was a long time ago. He had a small little farm. And one day his only horse ran away. And his neighbor came over and said, "Oh no, this is the worst thing ever. Your horse is gone. Oh my goodness, worst thing ever." And the farmer said, "Well, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. I don't know. I just know he's gone." The farmer thought, "That's weird." Or the neighbor thought it was weird. He went back home. Well, a few days later, that horse came back. And following that horse was a whole pack of wild horses. And they came into the corral, and he shut the corral, and all of a sudden he's got lots of horses. And here comes the neighbor again. "Oh my goodness! That was the best thing that your horse ran away. My goodness, that was good. And now you got all these horses. This is so good." And the farmer said, "Well, I don't know if it's good or bad. I just know it is. We've got all these horses now." Well, a few days later, the farmer's son was out training one of those horses. One of those wild horses. And it bucked him off and kicked him and broke his leg. And so now all the work fell on the farmer. It was extremely hard to keep up with everything alone while his son was down, and here comes the neighbor. And the neighbor goes, "Oh my goodness, this was a horrible thing that those wild horses came, because now you're hurt, your son's hurt, you can do all these, oh, it's horrible." And the farmer said, "I don't know if it's good or bad, I just know he's hurt, that's all I know." Well, the neighbor thought that was weird and went back home until shortly after that, the army came through. And they were off to fight in a war. And they wanted to conscript all the young, able-bodied men in the village, and so they did. But they came to the farmer's house, and his son had broken leg, was stuck in bed, and couldn't go with them to battle. So they went off to battle with all the young men but him. And here comes the neighbor. "Oh my goodness, it was a great thing that he got a broken leg. Oh my goodness, right?" And I heard the story. I remember hearing it a long time ago. And I thought, I'm the neighbor. I'm the neighbor. Am I the only one that relates to the neighbor in this story? It's like things happen and we're constantly judging. It's like, oh my gosh, the best thing ever, the worst thing ever, the best thing ever, the worst thing ever. And then things change, and all of a sudden our perspective changes all the time with it. So, you know who else did this in the Bible, by the way? Go read the book of Exodus. The Israelites did it all the time. All the time. Every time as they were going across to the promised land that God had promised to give them, any time anything went wrong, judgment of God. "You are terrible. You don't know what you're doing." One time they said to him, "Why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt?" You guys were praying for 400 years for that, by the way. You wanted this. And you willingly, anyway. Right? And so this is what the Israelites did. Every time something happened, their first thought was judging. It's the best, it's the worst, it's the best, it's the worst. It's like yo-yo, and I read this, like I said. I used to read when I was a young Christian, as a teenager, I'd read the story of the Israelites and how awful they reacted to God, and I'm like, boy, these people are screwed up. And then years later you realize, oh, it's me. I'm this person. Oh no, right? So here's what judging in the middle really what it's really about, what I learned. In every crisis you go through, there's three parts, right? There's the beginning, where all of a sudden you get the news. Whatever the news is. And it's shocking, and it's painful, and it's overwhelming. And then you got the end. And the end is where you can see light at the end of the tunnel, and you can see that you're gonna make it through this, right? But the hardest part is right in the middle, where you can't see how this is going to turn out. And you can't see light. And some of you are in the middle today. And what we do in the middle all the time is we judge God and we judge our circumstances. We say, like the Israelites, you don't know what you're doing. This is the worst thing ever. You are incompetent. You should be doing it this way, or this way, because after all, we know so much, right? And I learned this, like I said, this one's really painful. That's why it came right to mind when I started thinking about what I would do in this series. Is because when I was a young pastor, in the early 90s, I pastored a church in Madison that no longer exists. That's why I can tell you some of these details, because you can't even go look it up. So the church has been closed for about 25 years. And so I've been there. I'd always planned to stay. I believe in staying in a long, long time so nobody can have a positive impact. And so I was there, and it was not going well. And finally, it turned out, I brought in a group of pastors to kind of intervene and see what was going on with the problems. And it turned out that one of my elders, I only had two, didn't think I should ever be a pastor. He thought I was unqualified, incompetent, and wanted me gone. But he had never told me. But he told everyone in the church. And used it to hold my pay down to a point where we couldn't even live on what I was being paid without ever having a conversation with me. So this came out, and I was devastated. You can imagine the emotions, right? This affects your family. It was kind of like this final straw that God used to have me say, time to leave. Time to leave. So I was never going to leave, but that was it. It's like, all right, it's time to leave. And I was mad. I was mad at a lot of people. As you can imagine, I was pretty mad at God for allowing these circumstances, right? You allowed this, God. Now, I didn't say he caused it, right? God didn't cause that man to do that. But he allowed this to happen, and I was mad at God. Years went by, and God put me in the middle of a brand new experience, and so many incredible experiences that really, where my life just got substantially better. And a few years after that, after I'd left, I was driving in the car, and I heard something on the radio, and I turned the radio off, and I started thinking, you know what, it's a really good thing that I left there, because look at all the things I have now, and look at how much better my life is, and all of a sudden, it dawned on me what I had done. That when I was in the middle of that, I had judged God. You're incompetent. You're not kind. You're not fair. And the whole time he was saying, Brian, I have something else for you. You just have to let go of that, because this is where I'm going to bring you. And sitting in the car that day, I was overwhelmed with regret because of what I had done. I had judged him in the middle and assumed he had no idea what he was doing. In my life, what I've learned to spot are signs that I'm doing this wrong. See if these are a part of your life today. Lots of complaining. There's a lot of complaining. Bitter at God. I've been bitter at God more than once in my life. And once you're bitter at God, ignoring spiritual things is easy. But the result, interestingly enough, isn't joy and peace when we hit the jettison button on God from our lives. It's more anxiety and more stress. You just got to fix everything yourself. It's all about you. And certainly prayer seemed completely unimportant to me. But the reality is, and here's what was so overwhelming to me, those promises I shared with you earlier, that he loves me, and that he's at work in those situations that are awful, and that he's always working, and he can bring something good out of those things were true in my life. And once I learned this, I've seen it so many times. One time, years ago, I used to direct assessment centers for people who want to start churches. So the failure rate in church planting, we call it, going into a town, start a church from scratch, the failure rate is 90%. Within 3 years, 90% of those churches are dead. So it's a super high failure rate. But we had developed this competency-based model. We identified what are the core skills they need to be effective, and then we would evaluate candidates, and denominations from all over the country would send their potentials to us, and we would spend almost a week evaluating them, and we'd give them a recommendation at the end. And our success rate was 90% effective. If they would get a recommend and go out and start it, and after our assessment, 90% of those churches survived. So we spun the percentage up completely on its head. But when you're the director of those assessment centers, you know what that means? We'd have 12 to 14 candidates come in, and their hearts are already set on going into this town and starting a church, and many of them had denominational support and financial support lined up, and this is what they're going to do. And we would evaluate them based on that competency-based model, and we would be praying through the whole thing. It wasn't just like a list. And we would give them a recommendation, and many of those got the recommendation of not recommend. We don't see this as being a good fit for you. Do you know what that does to people who have their hearts set on it? Many of you know what that's like because you've wanted something and a door slammed in your face. That's exactly what it felt like to these people. I'll never forget one time. This couple came through. They were from Canada. They had denominational support. They had a place to stay. They had the town picked out. They had all the money raised, ready to go, right? So we're just going to rubber stamp them. But our entire team of assessors gave them a not recommend. This doesn't fit you. It doesn't fit you. And they were devastated. And as the director, you deliver all the not recommends. So I sat in the room with them and I gave them the assessment from the team, and the wife immediately just burst into tears. Scared. Where do I go now? What do we do now? What's left for us? We did reflect back to him. I reflected back to him some of the strengths that we saw. He had real strengths in the area of strategic planning, so we started talking about some of those things, but you know what it's like when you have an experience like that. They didn't know what to do. So I got an email from her months later. Here's what it said. She said, it was such a good experience going through the assessment. On our first week home was tough and somewhat emotional. We had no idea what we were going to do. But my husband met with the head of the conference, the head of the denomination, told him everything, and that man, in line with God's plan from the beginning of time, created a position for my husband right there on the spot. It was approved by the board. He was hired for a 3-month trial period, which he expects to be permanent, and his title is Director of Strategic Planning. She said, "Are you laughing yet?" And then she went on and said, not only that, some friends of ours who are missionaries sent us a check for $1,000. She said, "I nearly passed out." And then our former church, which owns the house we're living in, said we could continue to live there. She said, God's timing and provision were perfect. We have some friends already who want to support us financially in the event that we even need to raise money to live by. See, this is what I'm telling you. In the middle, it's the hardest. But the reality is, God's not confused, and He's not scared, and He's not weak, and He's not dumb. He is great, and can keep His promises to you even when you're in the middle. So here's a prayer of faith I want to challenge you to pray, especially if you're in the middle today. God, I trust you in the middle of this. And like I said earlier, faith doesn't depend on your emotion, does it? You can make yourself say it. Now, there's nothing wrong with adding a few words at the beginning, and many, many times I've done this. I've said, God, I'm confused, but I trust you in the middle of this. God, I'm scared, but I trust you in the middle of this. God, I'm hurting, but I trust you in the middle of this. And you add in whatever you need to say. And here's the thing about it. When God sees faith, you know what he does? He responds to that. For some of you, this is a huge faith step in your life today. So let me ask you to think about this as we finish up today. Are you in the middle of something hard or difficult right now? Chances are many of you are. Many of you, it's coming this year. So which of his promises do you need to focus on? That he loves you unconditionally? Listen, I can't explain why. I can't. But I know it has nothing to do with love. I know that. The cross proves that forever. He absolutely loves you. I can't explain why this is happening, but I know it has nothing to do with love. Or that he will bring good from this. Because right now, some of you are in the middle, and it seems so dark you can't possibly imagine good that God could bring from the middle of what you're going through. It feels impossible. He's not a liar. And he's not dumb. Or he's already at work. Are you judging in the middle? For some of you, this is the key sentence to add to your life. Is say, God, I'm confused, but I'm going to trust you in the middle of this. Let me have you bow your heads as we finish today. Jesus, I know that there are people who walked in here this morning and they're carrying the weight of something really, really heavy. And I don't know the future, but I know the future for all of us is that we will have times like this where we will be in the middle again and we won't understand it. And I've done this wrong, Father, and I just don't want anyone here to do it wrong too. I pray that you would really grow the faith of everyone, all of us together here. Now maybe as you're here today, we talk about Jesus Christ proving his love on the cross. That's really important that you understand that he died for you. Do you know that somebody said it wasn't nails that held Jesus to the cross, it was his love. He loved you and I enough to give his life on a cross for all of us. And everything really cool in our lives spiritually starts at the moment of surrender, when we give up our will to him and we say to Jesus, Jesus, I know I need you in my life. And I've heard that you died on that cross for me and the unloving things that I brought into this world. So I want to confess those to you. And at that moment of faith and surrender, Jesus comes to live inside of you and begin to work inside of you. So if you want this gift, you can take that step of faith today. With your head bowed and your eyes closed, say, Jesus, I'm turning to you. Jesus, I need you in my life in a bigger way. I'm surrendering to you. Please forgive me. Come make your home inside of me. In Jesus' name, amen.
So I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to watch this service online today. If you found it helpful, we always love to hear from people who are watching online. You can send us an email through the church website. If you go to penuelchurchlife.com, in the upper right-hand corner is a box that says, I said yes to Jesus, or I have a prayer request. If you click in that, you can communicate with us as a church. So if you do have something you want us to pray about, put it in there and send it to us, and we'll pray for you as a church. Or if you prayed the prayer at the end of the service and you want to let us know about that, give us your name and address, and we'll send you some material in the mail as a follow-up, as a way to encourage you in the next steps to grow spiritually. But again, thanks so much for taking the time to watch this service today, and we hope that God's great blessing rests on you.